answers.
What is Islam to you?
Islam to me would be something different, something foreign.
You tell them you're Muslim, and the first thing that pops in their head is, oh, she might be a terrorist.
They want to build a mosque on dead people's bodies.
It's a little bit scary.
Where are the moderate voices saying stop?
What do your friends think of America?
I'm sorry, but who do you think you are?
Women are given the shaft.
I would love to see your face, but I can't.
It is something that I love, and nobody could pay me to take this off.
Is it hard to put Islam into one word?
Almost impossible. If I can use 2 words, I think it's fanatic religion.
It's about peace.
Peace!
I would say superstition, but I would use that word for any religion.
I don't know.
Diane Sawyer and Bill Weir reporting with Lama Hassan. Islam, questions and answers.
Good evening. We're so glad you're with us tonight as we dive into the center of the American debate about extremism, Islam, and all of us together.
Diane, the national argument over that proposed Islamic center near Ground Zero has given rise to so much anger and suspicion, but also a genuine thirst for understanding.
All these emails we have received, you have asked us such great, tough questions. We're going to try to tackle them.
Hundreds of them from thousands of you. What does the Quran really say about violence against non-believers? Are Muslim women oppressed? And where are the moderate voices in what is now the fastest growing religion in the world?
For perspective, as of tonight, there are 1.5 billion Muslims on this earth, and that's 20% of the population. Christianity, still the largest religion, 33%.
And that's certainly the case, of course, here in America. 165 million Protestants in this country, 68 million Catholics, only about 5 to 6 million Jews, but the smallest group there, only 2 to 3 million American Muslims of all different sorts.
And as we start, we want to say that we know that this topic is so deep, we cannot possibly cover it all in 1 hour. And we remind you that on Sunday, ABC News will weigh in again, a town meeting with Christiane Amanpour. But let's begin now with some basic questions about Islam as viewed across the divide. Americans disturbed by Islam.
I think it's fanatic religion.
The main mission of them is to convert everybody to Islam.
But I don't really know that much about it.
American Muslims giving an answer.
Get to know us. We're just like everybody else.
Being a Muslim in America, in my opinion, doesn't make me any different than anyone else.
I grew up in the United States. I've never, lived anywhere else. I don't know what other identity I could have.
110% American.
But the fact is, nearly 3/4 of Americans say they don't really know anyone who's Muslim, nor have they asked what Islam really is. So we decided to begin with what Christians might call a Sunday school lesson.
If you are from God, show us a miracle.
What our ordinary Muslim children in America taught about the religion founded by Muhammad.
He was a good person.
He was an orphan and he helped other orphans.
And he always prayed.
But initially, his tribe was still worshiping stones and idols, while all around him, other tribes were already practicing Christians and Jews. And then in the year 610, Muhammad was meditating in a cave when he says he had a revelation. One God.
The idea of an angel speaking to you is a monumental thing, and so he ran to his wife Khadija.
And she was the first person who converted. She said, I believe in you.
And that revelation is in the Quran. The word Quran means recitation or readings. And it may surprise a lot of people that the Quran is filled with stories we all know.
It talks about how the world began, I guess, from Adam and Eve, and that's what Islam is.
In the beginning, Adam and Eve. Though in Islam, God created them equally out of dust, not one from the other. And there's also the Mother Mary in the book, who had a mystical conception and gives birth.
The trees around her bow low so that she can pick the dates, and the spring opens at her feet.
And another thing inside the Quran that wasn't mentioned by that pastor who wanted to burn the book, Terry Jones. The name exalted over and over in Islam is Jesus.
I was told that Jesus is the Messiah, who will come back at the end of time to establish the kingdom of justice and peace.
Not Muhammad?
Not Muhammad, the Christ. son of Mary. So we believe Jesus is the Messiah who will come back at the end of time to establish the kingdom of justice and peace on earth.
What percentage of Muslims would say that they believe that Jesus is the Messiah?
Well, you cannot be a Muslim if you don't believe Jesus is the Messiah. It's in the Quran.
And until Jesus comes, in the Quran, he sits at the right hand of God. So if you believe Jesus is a Messiah and sits at the right hand of God, what is the thing you believe that is different from Protestant and Catholic Christians?
The thing that separates Islam from and Judaism from Christianity is that we don't say that God has a son. Both Jews and Muslims do not attribute a son to God.
So in the Quran, Jesus is not the Son of God, nor does he die on the cross, but he is a divine prophet. And also in the Quran, the heart of Islam, Muhammad's 5 pillars, sort of like the 10 Commandments, 5 things that make you a Muslim. First, believe in one God, Allah, and that Muhammad is his messenger.
He was like, listen to me, Allah is the real God.
And 2,
fasting during the month of Ramadan.
Don't eat for breakfast and lunch and snack.
My parents don't let me fast, so I have to fast when I grow up, like 8.
Another one, give to the poor.
Charity can also be the physical act of, giving some spare change to a homeless person. It could even be, removing a piece of glass from the road.
A 4th, make a pilgrimage to the holy city Mecca, where Muhammad had his first revelation. And by the way, just as a lot of Christians can't always cite all of the 10 Commandments, not every Muslim can remember all 5 pillars. So far, we have 4.
See, I'm caught on that last one.
A 5th one, pray 5 times a day.
God asked us to pray as much as we can. Could be 5, it could be 3, it could be more than 5 times.
No, the reality is that the vast majority of Muslims in the United States are not mosque-attending kinds of Muslims, and that's okay. We were, the equivalent of Christmas and Easter Christians.
And you should know in Islam there are no drawings of Muhammad, because he said that images might become idol worship again. And so Muhammad's religion spread and branched into many different faces, the poetic Sufis, conservative Wahhabis. The most Muslims actually live in Asia. And there were secular branches like those in Turkey. And Muhammad said that we should all be tolerant of each other's religion. Our differences are God's mercy. And after he died, history saw the first real interfaith era.
For hundreds of years, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and atheists lived together, debated God, debated religion.
In those years of enlightenment, Muslims helped create advanced math like algebra, advanced medicine like the concept of contagious disease. And by some accounts, there were Muslims in the crew, arriving in America on the Niña Pinta Santa Maria.
Muslims have been in this country since Columbus.
We do know that Thomas Jefferson specifically included Islam when urging protection of religious freedom. And today, the estimated more than 2 million Muslims live coast to coast. In fact, in Dearborn, Michigan, they make up 1/3 of the population. There are 4 Muslim city mayors in New Jersey alone. Miss USA is a Muslim, so are these NFL players. And as a population, according to one survey, American Muslims have twice the college degrees of the average. They make a higher income than the average, and there is this. 7,000 of U.S. military troops are Muslim, fighting around the world for the American dream.
I'm a mayor of Teaneck, New Jersey.
I'm in corporate finance.
We have a jewelry line.
American is apple pie.
I want to be a teacher when I grow up. Soccer player.
A scientist. I want to be a doctor.
And even as we hear about vandalism and protests against mosques in America, there are already 1,900 of them rising peacefully above churches and synagogues. A beautiful new mosque is being built in my hometown, Louisville.
It's all built by people of Louisville.
This is physician Dr. Ammar Al-Masaki.
We need to give back.
So, hundreds of millions of peaceful Muslims say this is the real face of Islam. But a question. How did this religion become the symbol of what Americans fear? What about the brutality toward women? And most of all, how did we wake up one day in America to the specter of this? When we return, we ask, does Islam breed violence? Is there a virus of hatred inside these texts?
الموت لأمريكا.
العين بالعين والسن بالسن والقاتل له القتل.
Muslims don't believe that we worship the same God as the Christians and the Jews. They don't believe that.
We turn now to a controversial yet fundamental question. Is Islam inherently violent? So many of you out there ask questions along those lines, so we put them to Muslim and non-Muslim scholars of the Quran. They all insist this is a religion of peace, but like any other religion, it is the interpretation of the scriptures that separates a saint from a savage.
The words of the book are clear. If your brother, child, or wife worships another god, thou shalt surely kill him. Believers must bring that man or woman to the gates of the city and stone them with stones until they die. They seem like the sort of barbaric commandments the Taliban might follow. In fact, this cell phone video reportedly smuggled out of tribal Pakistan shows the stoning of a woman just 2 months ago. But the brutal passages that support this kind of horror aren't from the Quran, but the Bible.
Imagine how many monks and nuns there are all over the world who are chanting the Psalms every day. And in the Psalms there are some really awful verses about smashing babies' heads against rocks. But they chant them and it doesn't make them violent. We have a way of dealing with our scriptures as they are, and Muslims are in the same position.
The Old Testament is filled with tales of divinely ordained slaughter. Yet billions of modern Christians put them in context of ancient war stories, while focusing on the New Testament commandment of Jesus to love thy neighbor as thyself. So how do Muslims decide which parts of the Quran to follow? This part says there is no compulsion, no forcing people in religion, but over here it tells Muslims to fight those who believe not in God. Combing through your questions, we found a lot of you out there wondering about these apparent contradictions.
I've been told that the Prophet Muhammad wrote the Quran in 2 parts.
William in Tulsa is one of many who asked whether the Quran urges kindness in the first half.
Also that part 1 is more conciliatory to non-believers.
And violent jihad in the second.
And that part 2 supersedes part 1. Is this true?
Scholars agree that Muhammad's words turn more militant later in life, because at that point in history, his tribe was in a bloody war.
He's under siege by his own people. He becomes a warrior, a statesman, and a religious leader all at once.
Is it true, though, that those words should then supersede anything he said earlier?
Not at all. In fact, this is one of the hottest debates inside of Islam today.
While a fundamentalist Muslim follows Muhammad's instruction to fight the infidels, moderate scholars argue the infidels he was talking about were specific enemies that have been dead for 1,300 years. And the Quran only calls for jihad against invaders threatening a Muslim home.
One of your questioners mentioned this verse about killing infidels. It's interesting that the verse immediately after it says, if any of the unbelievers asks you for sanctuary, then take them into your houses so that they might hear the word of God, and then let them go on their way.
But militants conveniently ignore that verse or focus on other more controversial books. Is there anything in the Quran that promises 72 virgins for a holy martyr?
I don't see any evidence in the Quran for the pledge of 72 virgins. This notion of 72 virgins actually comes from a mistranslation, with the real translation being 72 raisins.
And other more modern books distort the scripture even more.
This is a book called Minhaj al-Muslim, for example.
As a teen in Egypt, Dr. Tawfiq Hamid got a hold of this sort of literature and eventually joined a terrorist group led by 9/11 planner Ayman al-Zawahiri.
Within 6 to 8 months, I became indoctrinated with certain forms of teaching that completely changed me to a very different personality that became ready to kill and die for Allah, to do jihad activity, to dream about dying as a shaheed or a martyr.
But he says he came to his senses when he was ordered to bury a police officer alive. He says bestsellers like The Way of the Muslim are often quoted in place of the Quran and contain dangerous ideas.
Which means the blood money or the compensation for killing of the disbeliever is half of the blood money of the Muslim man. When you devalue the life of non-Muslims, that is the root cause of the problem. Terrorism is the last step.
And radicals have used these murder and martyr myths to such great effect. Viewers like Eve in Kansas wonder,
how does mainstream Islam view suicide?
The killing of innocent civilians is expressly prohibited in Islam, and the killing of oneself is expressly prohibited in Islam.
That is a belief shared by more than 1 billion moderate Muslims around the world, including Roya Zanetti, a young woman I met in Cairo. And she is offended when I associate her country with the planners of 9/11.
Ayman al-Zawahiri is an Egyptian. Muhammad Atta was an Egyptian. What do Egyptians your age think of those people?
They're not us. I mean, they're just, you get radicals in absolutely everywhere in absolutely every religion. I mean, come on, don't tell me you don't have like cults or radical thinkers in the States.
Though she is a moderate in every sense of the word, she shares some of the fierce opinions that help drive radical thought in this part of the world.
What do you think? What do your friends think of America?
It's a country that should practice what it preaches. If it's all for democracy and freedom and all that, and it doesn't do that with other countries, especially countries it gets into or invades. I mean, I'm sorry, but who do you think you are?
Dictators combine that resentment with a perverted version of Islam and manipulate their people with a holy hatred of America.
The face they've seen of the West historically has been that of soldiers, missionaries, and today it's Britney Spears. The idea is that the Christian West is out to wipe them off the face of the map.
Many viewers asked about the significance of the fatwa, often perceived as an Islamic death sentence after Ayatollah Khomeini ordered Muslims to kill novelist Salman Rushdie.
A fatwa is nothing more than just one cleric's opinion. You could issue a fatwa that Coke is evil and you should drink Pepsi. Fatwas are a dime a dozen. They are meaningless.
But with or without a fatwa, slights against Islam led to the assassination of Dutch filmmaker Theo van Gogh when he wrote Quranic verses on scantily clad women. And there were deadly protests against Danish cartoonists who dared satirize the prophet. So when defenders say these are simply the works of mobs and madmen, Carrie in Tacoma wonders, how do we know if any Muslim is telling the truth?
Does the Quran teach the practice of al-taqiyya, lying to non-Muslims to advance and protect Islam?
According to the experts, an obscure law called al-taqiyya did allow early Muslims to deny their faith, but only under the threat of persecution. Extremists have turned it into a diabolical loophole for ignorant recruits who find Quranic justification in their suicide videos.
Because they say, don't tell your mother that you're going to blow yourself up. This is taqiyya. It's complete and utter garbage.
Religion is used as the excuse, as the cover. It is politics that poisons everything, not religion.
But here is the toughest question of all. If Islam is truly a religion of peace and terrorism is mostly driven by politics, why aren't there as many non-Muslim terrorists? After all, plenty of poor Christians live in the Middle East and disagree with American foreign policy.
Why they do not become terrorists? So it's obviously the religious element cannot be ignored here. Ignoring it is just like ignoring that you are facing a brick wall and you continue running and insist that it doesn't exist. You will just face the reality at the end.
There will be much more on that idea on our special town hall this Sunday on This Week. And coming up next, does Islam oppress women? Does it advocate barbaric punishments like stoning? We'll take on that when we come back.
So many Americans have visceral reactions to the symbol of the veil and Muslim women. For instance, take a look at a picture, this woman walking down the street. What are you thinking when you look at her? And what are you thinking when you look at her now? Well, as Western countries increasingly push back against women wearing the veil, we wanted to know more about what is real option, what is oppression. Whether in the name of piety, Islam is treating women as just property, second-class citizens in a culture controlled by men. Here's my ABC News colleague, Lama Hassan.
In too many Muslim communities, women are being forced to veil themselves.
From the crest of a sand dune emerges one of the most arresting and controversial images of Islam, a woman covered from head to toe.
To be enshrouded in a cloth prison is clearly suppression.
But this is an American, 32-year-old Hiba Ahmed, who lives with her husband and children near Albuquerque, New Mexico.
I do not see covering as a negative thing. It is something that I love, and nobody could pay me to take this off.
But have you not taken it a step too far? Because in the Quran, it doesn't say that women should cover their faces.
That's correct.
It says that they should dress modestly.
Exactly. But we also know that many of the pious Muslim women in our history also chose to cover their face as well, and it's an extra step that people can do.
Hiba started wearing that veil, called a niqab, after 9/11. The attacks inspired her to question, then commit to her faith. So did the sexual harassment Hiba says she experienced in her workplace.
So many times in society, women are objectified, they're sexualized, they're used to sell product. This is my liberation, and this is the way that I want to be taken seriously.
A personable American in a niqab is an appealing image, but it is far from the norm.
In a Muslim country, women are absolutely, undoubtedly oppressed.
The women I've spoken to say they are empowered. It makes them feel free because they are choosing to wear the niqab or to cover
Because
their
they're
faces.
in a free country and they can. And I will tell you that any woman who is not free is not coming on your show and telling you about it so she can go home and get abused. It's never going to happen.
Pamela Geller says it's important to remember the coerced coverings, the honor killings, the stonings, harsh examples of Sharia, a system of Islamic law which can be interpreted in many ways, but is often applied to oppress women. In this broadcast recently shown on Egyptian television, a Muslim cleric explains how and why a husband should beat his wife. In extreme cases, Sharia is about more than piety. It's also about treating women as chattel.
This is what it means to, submit to the will of Allah, is to submit to your father's wishes, to submit to your husband, to cover
Scholar
yourself.
and activist Ayan Hirsi Ali is one of the world's strongest critics of Islam. She says while the Bible and the Quran both contain misogynist passages, there's a crucial historical difference. Unlike Islam, the Jewish and Christian traditions underwent major transformations during the Enlightenment.
These are religions that were subjected to close scrutiny, to systematic criticism. That is a process that Islam, in general, has not gone through.
The impact has been profound. According to a recent study, 12 of the 14 countries with the worst gender inequality are predominantly Muslim.
How would you defend Sharia law?
I mean, honor killings and coerced head coverings are actually not Islamic. There are cultural and tribal practices.
But even here in America, there are horror stories. In 2008, Amina and Sarah Sayed of Texas were allegedly killed by their father after he found out they were dating non-Muslims. And last year in Arizona, 20-year-old Noor al-Maliki died after her father ran her over. Police say he claimed he did so because she was too Americanized before he pleaded not guilty to murder.
There are isolated cases, but they do happen. They happen in this country. Honor killings happen in this country. So that has nothing to do with the culture.
Right, but that they are in fact as isolated incidences, and they do not represent the vast majority of Muslims.
I am scared of devout Islam, of the Sharia in this country. I am.
Geller, a fixture at protests against the so-called Ground Zero mosque, ran these bus ads offering support to people, especially women who are trying to leave Islam but are fearful of retribution.
I'm not talking to all Muslims. I'm talking to Muslims that are in trouble, that need help. There are Islamic supremacists, and we see that they do try to impose their will on the societies that they infiltrate, and we need to be careful.
That resistance to Islamic influence echoes French President Nicolas Sarkozy's view of the niqab. It's not a religious symbol, he says. It is a sign of enslavement. It will not be welcome in the French Republic. What's happening here in France might be a model for those countries looking to push back against the influx of Islamic culture. This year, the French Parliament overwhelmingly passed a new and controversial law forbidding women to cover their faces in public.
The face is a dignity of a person. The face is your passport. So when you refuse me to see you, I am the victim.
Jacques Miard, a conservative member of the French Parliament, supports the ban.
You have countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia. Both countries dictate to women what they should wear. You're doing the same thing by telling them what not to wear.
I am imposing liberty, which is different.
In the midst of this clash of cultures, there are signs of hard-earned progress for women. In Kuwait, women won the right to vote in 2005. And Jordan has recently increased the punishments for so-called honor crimes. And for what it's worth, in 2007, Dubai hosted its first Fashion Week.
Women in the world of Islam really need to start asserting their individuality.
Professor Irshad Manji, an Islamic reformer, believes the Quran can be interpreted along more feminist lines.
The Quran is very, very clear that in the eyes of God, men and women have equal rights and equal responsibilities. That the Prophet Muhammad's own beloved first wife, Khadija, was a wealthy, self-made entrepreneur.
Islam can be reformed if the Quran can be revised.
Both Manji and Ali have received death threats for those kind of statements.
I have to be protected 24 hours by policemen who carry guns.
But Manji also received plenty of support from young Muslims eager for change.
We are living in a moment of incredible opportunity as Muslims to teach each other how to update interpretations for a brand new, diverse 21st century world.
And when we come back, one of the questions you ask us the most in your emails, why don't we hear and see more mainstream, peaceful Muslims speaking up and speaking out? After 9/11, every Arab country in the world except Iraq denounced the terrorists and expressed support for Americans. And American Muslims, by the tens of thousands, issued statements condemning violence.
The American Muslim Council condemns last week's bombing of the World Trade Center.
But so many of you wrote us that you think in the years since the American Muslim community has gone silent.
Hi, my name's Roy Stoner. I'm from Chesapeake, Virginia.
Roy Stoner, not a Muslim, says his son is serving his third combat tour in Afghanistan, and he asks, where are the mainstream Muslims around the country?
Is there something in the Islamic religion that keeps Muslims from speaking out or demonstrating publicly against the radical Muslims that we are fighting?
He asks they please speak up more.
I think this would be very important to the American people and to our troops to know that there are people of the Islamic religion that support us.
So we set off to Paterson, New Jersey, the second largest Arab community in America. All-American schools, all-American shops. You can see the pistachio and date cakes from the Middle East right next to the Easter chocolate. Some Muslim women in headscarves, some in shorts. And the Muslims there were candid with us, that they resent being asked all the time to explain extremism.
Sometimes I get annoyed because I always feel like I'm apologizing for something I didn't do again. You know, we're always trying to apologize. We have to be extra nice now.
The way we moderate Muslims feel about extremists who hijack Islam to hurt others
is that those people exist in a totally different moral universe than we do. And somebody who would kill somebody else with Arabic prayers on their lips, we look at them and say, who are you? We're afraid of them. That person is our enemy. And the notion that we have to apologize for people that we not only feel disconnected from, but that we feel afraid of and that we feel as our enemy is a little bit surprising to us.
We were also told in Patterson, don't underestimate what it's like to be surrounded by suspicion.
I have to say that there is a real sense of fear. People were saying to me that they were scared sending their kids to school for fear of bullying because of their names.
Even if they have a Muslim friend, that they might secretly wonder, well, they seem nice, they seem cool, but is that really who they are?
Who is this guy involved with?
What do they do at home?
Islam is a lie from the pit of hell, and we need to be able to speak that truth.
I think that kind of fear and suspicion is ultimately what's more dangerous than any kind of lack of information.
In the barber shop, this man says a lot of people in America think Palestine should be its own country. But when a Muslim says it?
All we ask for is you to free Palestine, and we'll be all right. We love it. We love America. That's why we're here. There's a certain, feeling after 9/11 that you got to be careful what you say now, as an Arab, as a Muslim, as an American, and it's just not right. We disagree with what they're doing over there.
And we remember on the day the Twin Towers fell, Farouk Mohammed was working for the New York City Fire Department.
There were Muslims like me there, and some that died, trying to help others, and we're American just like other Americans. I mean, as much as I hate to say it, on that very day, while I was doing my work, I had a uniform on that had my name on it, Muhammad, and people were asking me what's going on, as if I had something to do with it.
And one more reminder, 7,000 Muslims are fighting in the American military.
When you hunker down in silence, then you let others define you. And I think that's very dangerous.
Moderate leaders need to speak up. They may have to wear a bulletproof vest to do it, because there will certainly be conservatives and radicals in their own faith tradition that say, you know what, you're not a true Muslim. And that is a really scary charge that people have to be willing to face.
We keep saying, where are the moderate voices saying, stop, stop, we will rise up 1 billion strong and say you have to stop this?
They're everywhere. They really are.
But who is going to do it? Who is going to be the Gandhi of this movement? Who's going to be the Mandela, the Martin Luther King that does this?
I don't know that we can reduce it to one single name or person. I think one of the problems and challenges within Islam is that there isn't a pope. There's no equivalent of a Muslim pope.
I mean, it's almost as if you say, why not have a 1 million-man march on Washington?
That would be
moderate Muslims.
That would be a fabulous idea.
1 million Muslims marching through the streets of Washington is a great idea. Why not? Show us that this faith is peaceful. Show us that it's not out in any way to get us in the streets of our own cities.
And reminding us that all the peaceful American Muslims are part of America's first line of defense. Recently, the Imam Faisal Rauf, the Imam of the Islamic Center to be built near Ground Zero, made a passionate promise on 60 Minutes.
If 9/11 happens there again, I want to be the first to die. Muslims want to stand right there to say that we are here. It's my duty as an American Muslim to stand between you, the American non-Muslim, and the radicals who are trying to attack you.
And when we return, a lesson learned by Americans in one town because of one little girl.
Friday nights in Dearborn, Michigan. The biggest game of the year for the Fordson High School Tractors as they take on crosstown rivals Edsel Ford High.
You know, it's bet all the best, and you're going to have everyone in the city talking about this game.
classic slice of Americana, with one interesting exception. About 2/3 of the team are devout Muslims, including star player Rabia Baidoun.
I'm the Fortson running back on offense, and I play cornerback on defense.
Baidoun scored 3 touchdowns in the 35-14 win. And afterwards, pure joy. There is no holy war on this battlefield. The Christian and Muslim players bonded long ago.
Doesn't make a difference what religion. When you get the helmet and the pads on, everyone's a brother. It doesn't matter.
I don't like to call them friends on this team. They're all family.
With such a strong and vibrant community, this town and the team are a haven to kids like Rabia. But when the Tractors hit the road for away games, it's a different story.
Just the looks and everything, you know, you feel uncomfortable already. We had guys calling us, you effing Arabs, you this, you that.
But that kind of adversity and shared human experience only toughens bonds with the people who know and understand them. And those bonds can come through a winning season or a communal tragedy. Sheboygan County, Wisconsin is a place about as different from Manhattan as you can imagine. But this year, they had their very own mosque controversy here, one nearly as bitter as the dispute near Ground Zero.
They are hitting criminals.
In February, a local doctor bought this former health food store with the intention of turning it into a mosque for the few dozen Muslim families who live nearby. And that came as unsettling news to Wayne DeVrue, pastor of the First Reformed Church.
Radical Islam is what we're at war with, and so if you don't know if your new neighbors teach something radical or not, it raises a question mark.
People, they came and they are upset and they are angry, they are mad.
There isn't a Muslim in this room that can say they peacefully assemble.
Say this is going to be, they are terrorists.
Muhammad Hamad is a mechanical engineer and also the imam, or spiritual leader of this mosque. After 10 years living in the Midwest, he never dreamed his house of worship would lead to a months-long battle with neighbors, punctuated by a rock through the window. The town board eventually voted to allow the mosque, but a simmering resentment remained. Just weeks later, on a beautiful summer day, 9-year-old Sophia Khan was vacationing on the shores of Lake Michigan with the rest of her family, Muslim Americans from Chicago. Toward the end of their last day, little Sophia played in a kayak just steps away from her father.
She was close to the shoreline, and a wave came in and pulled her offshore further out into the water, and I could not catch up with her.
Got within about 20 feet of his daughter, and as he crested a wave, he could see her, and the last thing that she said to him was, "Daddy, I'm scared." And when he came back down, he lost sight of her, came back up, and she was out of the kayak.
Rita Hemmerling is one of Pastor Wayne DeVrue's parishioners. She says the moment Sophia went missing, all the grudges and suspicion melted away.
We really, really felt that tragedy and that bonding and the way that we could come together and help each other.
It didn't matter what ethnicity you were, where you go to church, people came together and helped their brother.
The next morning, Sophia was still missing, but Omar Khan was no longer searching for his daughter alone.
I went out into the water to see if there was something there. And as I turned around to look, and it brought tears to my eyes that it wasn't just me anymore. About 40 other people were in the water.
For 3 weeks, the Muslims and Christians of Sheboygan County searched side by side for Sophia.
She gave us a gift we will be remembered for the rest of our life. In spite of her size, she built a bridge, that bridge 100-mile length between communities.
Tragically, Sophia was never found, but she left something very valuable behind.
So if any good can come from such a horrific event, maybe a little more understanding?
Oh, definitely, definitely. And it also opened eyes for me personally, so much more than my previous knowledge of what a Muslim does, what their traditions are. I mean, these people were just awesome.
9 years after 9/11, fear and suspicion seem as raw as ever.
One man does not define a religion.
But in some of America's football fields and farmlands, there are seeds of understanding, and maybe the roots of reconciliation. We'll be right back with some final thoughts.
We're back now. Bill and Lama and I have talked about what a journey this was for each of us.
Learned so much. And it occurred to me at a certain point, there's not a Christian in America who would let their faith be defined by a abortion clinic bomber or a pedophile priest, because the neighbors all understand what Christianity is. And the more I learned about what Islam is, the more Muslims felt like neighbors.
Well, I grew up in a Muslim household, and I didn't know that much about my own religion. It was only until now that I found out that some of the text is misconstrued or misinterpreted, especially in the West.
Especially perhaps here in America with all the complexity right now. And one thing we all know for sure, and you do too, we know, we've heard it in your emails, is that it depends on Muslims, non-Muslims linking arms together to ensure the security of this country and the world. And we know you have other questions, but some of them will be answered this Sunday. Again, Christiane Amanpour will be continuing this conversation. I'm Diane Sawyer for Bill Weir, Lama Hassan, and all of us at ABC News. Good night.